the Requiem Metal Podcast, episode 19, Morbid Angel.
Welcome to this episode of the Requiem Metal Podcast. This is your host, Jason Hundy.
And this is Mark Rudolph.
And we're revisiting a kind of a classic band this week. We're going to be looking at the David Vincent-Era of Morbid Angel, kind of appropriately inspired from our talk with Albert, because he was talking about some of the most essential death metal records, you know, if he had to pick five. And he said, really, any of the first 3 or 4 Morbid Angels, you know, would be pretty essential as well. And kind of in spirit of the fact that David Vincent has rejoined the band in the last few years. Even though
5.
Yeah, I know, 3 years ago, but we haven't seen anything yet in terms of an album output, but kind of in hopes and anticipation for whatever the next record's going to be, which has to start with an I. So it would be like Immolation of the Souls or Incantation of, you know, the Ancient Ones or something.
A, B,
C, D, and then Entangled in Chaos, Formulas Fatal to the Flesh. Gateways to something, Annihilation, and then Heretic. So the alphabet is going. The alphabet is going on Morbid Angel. So expect an I record soon. So, but you know, I digress. Basically, you know, Morbid Angel is given a lot of credit for almost kind of single-handedly birthing the American death metal scene, alongside probably, you know, with the stuff that Chuck was doing with Death. You know. Whereas Death was a lot more sort of primitive and definitely came out of the roots of, you know, Venom and Possessed and stuff like that. Not that Morbid Angel didn't, but there was this sort of dynamic...
Well, the guitar virtuoso, I mean, the Eddie Van Halen of death metal, which has been called many times, you know, Trey Zagazoth or George Emanuel, if you prefer.
Say that 5 times fast. But, you know, and then the recruitment and the training regiment that they put their drummer under, which is sort of infamous, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then sort of balanced out in a way by the bass player and probably one of the best, if not the best, American death metal vocalist, David Vincent.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
and actually a really good lyricist as well.
Absolutely. You know, definitely not cliche, you know, like a lot of the death metal stuff sort of gets.
I mean, he was one of the first, like, death metal guys I remember seeing the interviews on the Hard and Heavy Grindcore special where, you know, he's sitting there talking about, you know, humanism as Satanism and, like, an intelligent guy. And
yeah, that was...
I think he was kind of like... He seems to be like the force that kind of keeps Trey in check.
Yeah, and that's definitely like a big thing about why I think a lot of people are excited to hear that he's back in the band, because he really was, you know, like part of this very fine kind of balancing act that existed between, you know, Trey's sort of completely like out there ideas, which were really cool and experimental a lot of times, and then Pete was totally like devoid of ideas except just pounding the crap out of drums. And so he never balanced Trey out at all, but David Vincent always felt like the middle guy who was like, all right guys, that idea's cool, but like, let's tone this down, we don't need to get it.
So the only guy that was actually any kind of weight to Trey, it seems like, because once the other guys came on, like who was the other Tucker?
Tucker replaced David Vincent on Formulas Fatal to the Flesh.
It seems like, you know, well, Morbid Angel's this like legendary band, like, you know, I'll do whatever you say just to be in the band kind of thing. So I think those later on albums kind of started to teeter out a little bit.
And I don't know if maybe, you know, David Vincent had a slight hand in brainstorming some of the ideas on Formulas Fatal to the Flesh, or if he was completely like, you know, none of that was inspired by anything him and Trey had worked on, say, on the Domination tour, because that album in particular is really solid, and it almost fits into the canon of those first 4 records, and then after that Morbid Angel starts to, you know, kind of fall apart in terms of quality, in my opinion. Now some people might argue with that, but you know, that's why we're here to do a show about the first 4 records. So, you know, you may like the later stuff, but you're going to be hearing stuff off the first 4. In terms of the band's origins, you know, the band existed in kind of a pre-Altars of Madness form on the Abominations
of Desolation.
Of the Desolation, yeah. Which I used to have on vinyl, actually, and sold on eBay. I don't know. Maybe that wasn't a wise idea, but I think it was just the reissue. It wasn't anything totally special. But, you know, the band featured Mike Browning back then, who went on to form another sort of famous Florida death metal band, Nocturnus. Kind of some cool elements of Nocturnus and some kind of hokey stuff, depending on what your take on the
Interesting
keyboard.
idea, yeah. Sci-fi metal was kind of a cool idea, but I don't know if it doesn't really hold up very well. The Key has a couple alright songs still on it. But.
Sure. But Browning sang on that Abominations record, if I'm not mistaken, and played drums, correct?
Yeah, had a great headset when he would play.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, in line with some of the very famous drummer/vocalists like King Fowley from Deceased, and Phil Collins of Genesis, and whoever else was.
And I can't even think of the guy's name right now. The drummer of Autopsy was a singer as well.
Oh, Reifert.
Chris Reifert.
Was he the drummer? I can't remember.
Oh, jeez.
We're gonna get banished off the radio waves for that, or whatever. Not radio waves, off the podcast waves. But so they kind of started, alongside a lot of the early nucleus of the Florida death metal scene, which was sort of given birth by Chuck Schuldiner, Mantis demos, and then the Death demos started to come out, and then Scream Bloody Gore kind of hit the scene in 1987, even though it had been kind of recorded a little bit earlier than that. And Morbid Angel, I think, alongside Executioner, were one of the first to sort of pop out. Right, and then Executioner became Obituary.
Yeah, and kind of out of, talent-wise, you look at those three bands, and Morbid Angel just popped right out. They had the imagery going on. They had, this whole mystique around them, then this unbelievable music that nobody played guitar like that at all. Even, the whole Van Halen reference kind of stuff. I mean, that was
more
just
Hendrix almost, in terms of,
Yeah, it was just more of an abstract way of thinking about playing leads and stuff, and he'd mess around with time signatures, almost playing stuff backwards, and, totally unique sounding player that nobody's really captured that sound or that just explosive energy that he had.
Yeah, and I think Browning just didn't work out with
he had
with
a monotone
the band
voice too. He was just kind of boring. He was a bad drummer. I mean, compared to Pete Sandoval, he was kindergarten drumming.
And so the band kind of kaput it, and kind of reformed, and they brought in Dave Vincent on bass and vocals. And
it was actually, I think, David Vincent's label was going to put out that first record.
Yeah,
and then he ended up coming on as
in the band.
And
then they found Pete Sandoval, as sure many of you already know, from an LA band or California band. I don't know if they're LA or San Francisco, somewhere in that realm. Terrorizer, featuring Jesse Pintado, who went on to Napalm Death fame, and
don't forget Oscar Garcia,
of course. Who I don't know, what did Oscar Garcia end up doing?
Not a whole lot. And David Vincent played on.
That's true, on World Downfall. And they brought Sandoval in, and he had been kind of a grindcore drummer, and so he wasn't used to doing a lot of the technical stuff. And I remember reading in Albert's book, Choosing Death, about how he would just practice in the basement, and they would go downstairs and find him passed out in a pool of sweat, and he just get back up and be like, I gotta get better, I gotta get more technical. And I think that represents his personality, as we were kind of talking about before. I mean, he's just almost autistic in terms of his focus on just being a drummer.
Really.
I don't want to say he lacks personality, but he's just sort of like a caveman.
I just don't think he cares.
Yeah,
it seems like that's the only thing he cares about is playing drums, and that's the thing with Vincent was almost the mouthpiece for the band for those years. Trey was just kind of left off to do his thing, and he'd do interviews every once in a while, but some of his answers are just wow, where the hell is this guy coming from?
Yeah, and Trey definitely is avant-garde personality. I mean, he's definitely one of those just sort of offbeat, kind of artsy kind of people in his own right. I don't know if he's not like a Jackson Pollock artsy kind of guy. He's
it's weird. I mean,
Nintendo and Tony Robbins.
Music and you hear his music and you're like, wow, this guy's into some crazy stuff. He's really into this whole Lovecraftian.
Yeah, the Necronomicon
and then you hear I love anime and Tony Robbins self-help stuff, and it's just wow,
John Madden football and
it's all over. He's like
Nintendo
a 12-year-old. It's the kind of stuff I'd be into.
Yeah, and again, it's this autistic idiot savant sort of just focus on he's just guitar god, and that's how his mind works. And Pete's just a drum god, and then Dave Vincent's, like I said, the guy in there kind of balancing him out.
Yeah, he seems like I mean, not to make it really simplistic, but he seems like the adult in the situation. He's a decent bass player. He's not flashy.
No,
great vocalist, but he seemed to be the mature one to kind of okay, guys, let's get with it here.
Absolutely. And so they kind of emerged from the swamps with Altars of Madness, which was one of the first Earache releases, and I think Digby had heard their demo or something like that, and flew over to sign the band or something like that. And he actually ended up producing their first record or sitting in on it. I don't know how much production he did. And Altars of Madness really put American death metal on the map in terms of an explosive force. You know, I mean, before that you had Leprosy from Death, which is an awesome record in its own right, but very like
it's primitive.
Brutal, exactly.
Primitive.
And I think Trey almost maybe challenged Chuck in a way to up his ante in terms of becoming a great guitar player, and obviously then he brought in James Murphy on Spiritual Healing, and then moved in the direction of Human and Individual Thought Patterns, and they were almost like the two great guitar god figureheads of that scene.
Well, it's similar to what we were talking about with the difference between like Satyricon and Emperor. I mean, Chuck seemed to kind of take more of the straight, let's follow scales and this kind of stuff, and Trey is just completely
inventing his own style, playing his own scales and things like that.
I mean, he's technically probably a better guitarist than Chuck, I would say, but he just takes all those chords you learn, like, why can't I just play them this way?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, and you'll hear it when we play this first set from Altars of Madness, in terms of just how everything sort of explodes out at you at different times. The drums sort of feel like they're just ready to almost like break out and fall apart. Almost.
Well, when I first heard this record, it seemed like the true evil version of like what Hell Awaits sounds like when it starts out. All these just like the swirling guitar and these swells and the true soundtrack to Hell is Altars of Madness.
yeah, absolutely. And these guys too also were the first death metal band in America, and I think in the world, really, to get signed to a major label, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And so Morbid Angel has always enjoyed this sort of grandfatherly kind of presence within the American death metal scene. I'd say alongside Chuck, those are sort of the two bearers of the whole scene. And now that Chuck's gone, and then kind of Morbid Angel fell into ruin in the late 90s and early 2000s in terms of kind of falling off the map. It's kind of interesting to see where they're going to be able to bring the scene back, because there really aren't any expectations for what they're going to put out next. No one knows what to expect. No one really cared about their last couple records, and so it's almost a clean slate to do something cool, and possibly
David
interesting.
Vincent's been out of death metal for 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, playing with his wife in Genitortures, but we'll talk about some of that kind of stuff later. But so anyways, let's get to some music here. Altars of Madness, my memories of this record were that I think I mentioned last week in the Satyricon podcast, I picked this up at the same time I bought Nemesis Divina, but I had already been familiar with a trio of tracks, because I think when I was like a sophomore in high school, I came across a used tape of the Grind Crusher, and that was my introduction to like Old Godflesh, Old Entombed, Confessor. Who else was on that tour? Carcass as well, like the Reek and Symphonies kind of stuff. But the tunes that really jumped out to me, besides I think Like Rats from Godflesh, was Chapel of the Ghouls and like Maze of Torment, and Immortal Rites was the third track on there as well. But for some reason I really glued on to like Maze and Chapel. It was so catchy, it was unbelievably catchy, but like you said, uncomfortably explosive, with the riffs sort of flying out at you, and
really visceral. And I mean, when I saw the photos on the back of Trey, I was like, oh my god, the guy looks like he's got a demon face.
Yeah, and there's like blood in his face and all kinds of crazy
stuff. Seeing that the Immortal Rites video on that Grind Crusher thing, or the Hard and Heavy special, Grindcore special or whatever, that was just like, wow, these guys are serious.
Yeah. And the thing that's interesting about that Hard and Heavy interview is like as a kid growing up with this sort of stuff, in terms of especially the kind of overt Satanism that you would find in like Morbid Angel and a lot of death metal stuff, even though theirs was like kind of lured into like the myths of Sumerian gods and a lot of this sort of ancient kind of evil type stuff that came from the...
It seemed like beyond Satanism.
Yeah,
like
it was
interdimensional.
It was weird. But I remember his explanation of Satanism was really interesting, and not that I'm I'm a Satanist or anything crazy like that, but it almost made sense to me. For the first time.
Instead of like evangelizing like LaVey or something, he actually like had a straightforward way where you could.
He's just like, it's just total freedom. We're free to make choices on our own, and we don't have to answer to anybody but ourselves. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's not a bunch of people in like devil costumes, like running around on Halloween or something. So a lot of interesting memories about this record, and really. Probably one of my two favorite Morbid Angel records, I'd imagine, just for posterity's sake. Mm-hmm. It just sort of has a nostalgic feel to it. It's a little rough around the edges at times, but that's what's...
outside of Covenant, I think it's the best, front-to-back record they did.
Yeah, and that's...
There's not a clunker song on there.
And we'll talk about the difference between this and the huge contrast on their second record when we come back. But we're going to hear a quad of songs, not a trio, like we normally do, but we're going to hear Immortal, Rites, and Visions from the Dark Side.
Dark Side, yeah.
Yeah, which is, we kind of had to pick between that and Suffocation, and there's a lot more interesting things kind of happening on that. And then we'll round out with Maze of Torment and Chapel, the Ghouls, which we'll talk maybe a little bit about that song when we come back.
Catch a spell on our life, that's the bigger scene. gift of immortality bestowed on those who seek you. Now immortal. Satan's ride.
just heard Chapel of the Ghouls, Maze of Torment, Visions from the Dark Side, and we started that set off with Immortal Rites. All of those songs, of course, were from their debut kind of full length, Altars of Madness, which was put out in 1989. They're proper full length with the kind of the real band. And we should mention as well that the first two Morbid Angel records also featured Richard Brunel on guitar, kind of counteracting some of the stuff that Trey was doing and playing a different style.
A lot of solos on those records too. I don't know, but he's not really credited with writing anything, so I don't know if it's just.
I think he's like doing like more like the Bill Steer kind of sound, the crunchier type stuff, whereas Trey was doing like more the Mike Amott kind of stuff.
I mean, he's listed as a lead player that they went back and forth, but it's hard to distinguish.
Sure.
And for the recording, a lot of the time they'll just have one guitarist kind of sit down and do that. So I imagine Trey probably recorded all the stuff. But
yeah.
Who knows?
And I don't know if it's like a Kerry King, Jeff Hanneman thing where they just kind of...
It's almost interchangeable.
Yeah. But the next record that we're going to get into is called Blessed Are the Sick. And this is a strange record. And a lot of people kind of love it as like their favorite, or it's their least favorite of the early Morbid Angel. Not that it's a bad record at all, but it's just...
It's kind of the sophomore slump thing.
Yeah, maybe. I mean... But I've also talked to people who like live and die by this record and find like Covenant like commercial and boring, and that's kind of absurd to me too. But it's kind of like we talked about last week with Satyricon. Everybody's got their preferences and things. But Morbid had gone on this enormous tour after this and toured the world with a lot of the sort of elite bands that were going on in Europe, like Carcass and Godflesh. And they were sort of really, the whole Florida scene was blossoming at this time. I mean, Obituary was putting their stuff out, Deicide was putting their stuff out,
Cannibal
was moving down there. This is sort of the birth of Morris Sounds Studios in a way, and I'm pretty sure this record was produced at Morris Sound. So it sort of fits into that canon of sort of Florida death metal in the early 90s, which was so influential to the whole rest of the world.
And this totally has the same kind of like drum sound I noticed as like Harmony Corruption or the first couple of Obituary records, that kind of soft kick drum sound and that really warm but somehow distant drum sound that they had going on.
And I wonder if they were just using a lot of the same like drum kind of click samples and things like that at the studio.
I don't know. I'm sure. I mean, with Tom Morrison, with other, I can't think of the other guy's name right now.
Scott Burns.
Jeez. Yeah, we're at the cabin, so we're
still at the cabin,
outside of comfort zones here with the internet and all that. But no, that seemed like these first couple records actually kind of like they figured out how to dial in everything to like record a death metal record right. And I think this was kind of,
it's tight.
They're feeling around, a little bit with this. It's not quite as when we hear in Covenant, it's like, okay, this is the real deal. But this was still kind of, I think they're kind of weeding it out. And
I think they were interested in being less barbaric, like our altars, and being more progressive and just like tighter. And that's one thing you can say about this record is it's almost too uptight, and I think that's maybe the problem. It's everything is so almost like contained in a way. Yeah. Whereas like when you get to Covenant, it still has the speed and the technical prowess that Blessed Are the Sick have, but Covenant is a little bit warmer and a little bit more opened up, and they can almost be experimental in the way that they were experimental in Altars, but do it in like this very focused, edited sort of way.
Yeah, it seems like they actually had the producer actually kind of like, okay, maybe we could cut this stuff out. Like he actually like did what a producer usually does is, get that kind of focus and pull stuff out of you that you wouldn't normally do.
And so I don't know, maybe Blessed is overproduced in a way. It's just over like tightened or something. I mean, I don't know where their state of mind was at this time. It's early 91 when they're recording this.
It's got all these weird breaks and kind of like chapter intro things, and like the whole intro of the album's kind of you could do without it. Doesn't really set the tone that I'd like to hear on a Morbid Angel record. But
and I don't know if maybe they were influenced by what Obituary had done the previous year on Cause of Death with some of those like kind of flowing like intro outro things to songs that I can't remember the one guy's name who did all that. It wasn't one of the band members, but it was some like guy who was doing a lot of it on keyboards and things like that, almost like a composing it.
I can't think of his name.
But it's got a lot of those sort of movements in it, from Doomsday Celebration to Thy Kingdom Come, or no, not what is it, Desolate Ways, In Remembrance. There's all these sort of like instrumental like interludes in between a lot of the songs, and that was
there's like some goofy flute stuff, and I was like, what? And Desolate Ways, I mean, is a pretty sweet
and I think we're gonna play like a little sample of that, because that's more just sort of like a Richard Brunel kind of classical guitar stuff. It's really neat, but so it's it's dealing with these samples. They slow the music down in a lot of the songs. It kind of has like a doomier Celtic Frost vibe. But then of course there's some songs like the song we're gonna play first, "Fall from Grace," which Mark and I are commenting. It just sounds like a beat down. I mean, it's like a death. Like you almost feel drained when you hear it. Like someone just kicked the crap out of you. And if that's what they were going for, then they definitely achieved that on a lot of these songs. But for me, I don't know if you remember. You would have heard this when it first came out. I mean, what was your guys' reaction to this in response to what you had heard on Altars?
It was just kind of... It took a while to get into. It was one of those kind of grower records. I mean, after a while, I really got into it, but I always found myself skipping those little intro tracks or, like, the interludes between tracks just because it's like... It kind of slowed things down. I mean, it was an interesting juxtaposition, I guess, but it didn't really further anything.
Yeah, and for a long time I had this on cassette tape, so it was weird because I would like listen to it maybe when I was mowing the lawn or driving around in my truck, and like I couldn't have picked a single out on this record because really. Like without a CD there showing you which track number you're listening to, it just was like a bleed of sound, the whole thing. And
maybe it was their attempt to try to make this one big movement, one kind of like a big orchestrated kind of album. I don't know.
And that could be. And I feel like, Blessed Are the Sick leading the Rats, which is sort of the middle track, kind of slowed things down. And I think that started off the side 2 of the cassette tape. So I remember that song in particular. But it's a stranger record, and almost comparable to what Albert was mentioning when we talked about At the Gates, when he was talking about With Fear I Kiss the Burning Darkness, in terms of just being a difficult record to get into and wrap your head around because of the way it was produced and just the sound and the single tone that a lot of the songs have on this record.
I think they're trying to probably kind of spread their comfort level out a little bit too, and try something new, but I don't know how successful it was. I mean, there's some great songs in there, but it's just it's kind of a thin production and kind of all over the place.
Although I'd have to say it obviously was very successful because this is what gets them signed to Giant Records.
Yep.
Gunter Ford's
the label doesn't exist anymore, does it?
Yeah, I don't think it does. But who are they linked to? Giant? I can't remember which. Like they were on the same record as I just remember like Color Me Bad was on Giant Records and stuff. I mean,
Isn't
it was
Giant EMI.
It might be EMI, possibly. Okay. I don't quote us on that one. We're kind of unsure, but
you could get it through the record clubs at that point.
Could you? That's weird.
Get Covenant through record. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Columbia House or whatever.
But so Bless Are the Sick, the last record to feature Richard Brunel, and again they're dabbling in more of the occultish sort of stuff. There's some great lyrical things on here, and the cover I'd say is remarkably better than Altars. At least I'll say that.
Yeah, I don't know. I like the Altars cover.
Do you like the Altars?
I think it's sweet.
I think it's got a classic sense to it, but I know some people kind of slag on it because of the kind of cartooniness of it. But
that's a Dan Seagrave cover. I mean, it's just a bunch. I mean, it's similar in like the Left Hand Path cover, how it's got all this like goofy like little interdimensional demons or something coming out or whatever.
Yeah. This cover just like has like a weird, like you found some ancient text and it's some bizarre medieval illustration of like demons or Satan, like it's the only thing about it is that you can't really tell what's going on. It's not very well.
That's one thing you look from album to album to album. They never have a consistency to their visuals.
Yeah,
I mean, especially with Domination. What a horrible
and Formula State of the Flesh.
Yeah,
someone needs to like edit them in a way, I think. But so let's get into some music. We're gonna hear, like we said, the beatdown track "Fall from Grace," and followed by "Rebel Lands," and then probably one of our we kind of thought of it as the most dynamic track on the record, and that's "Abominations," followed by like a little sampling of some of the kind of acoustic or instrumental things, from Desolate Ways. So enjoy.
emptiness, formulas of death, concrete of hell, in the dark of the dead, see them tools, rising spears of non-rock too, bow down before the master, and pray that it's him God's door, where all the ensnare us, blind means of chaos rule. Power this year, in the name of the abs I call, come and carry my curse to the ones who cause me disgust. May they burn in my cauldron, blow their heads, molten wax, burn, consume their power, so mold it be. We're on the moon, robbing the spirit, raping God off, send a party, burn heaven's gates. Turning, see him out to place of weaving death. See him on, dark servants, Lord the loving rage, hate for God, bring some chaos, yeah. On the book, on the worm, burn the sense of Christ. Bow down before the master and pray to the feet of God. Prayer of the ensnare, blind needs of chaos rule.
Welcome back from Desolate Ways, Abominations, Rebel Lands, and Fall from Grace from the second Morbid Angel record, Blessed Are the Sick. And as we mentioned in the last talk set, more big things are happening for Morbid Angel at this point. You know, what was your guys' response? Because you guys by then were pretty into the magazine, I'd imagine, by like 94, 93 when this record came out. And
yeah, I mean, it was kind of a huge, nobody really knew what to expect. I mean, to hear that a band of their caliber and their like intensity got on a major label was kind of like, well, I think there's some hesitation there, but God, when we heard the record, that was just, holy crap, this is more than we expected.
Yeah, it kicked the crap out of you. I mean, it's a gut punch.
Their most focused record that they've done.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the most consistent thing they've done. I mean, Altars has its own consistency for what it was and its brutality.
But this, as far as like consistently good songwriting over the full record, production's great on it. It's got Flemming Rasmussen that did like, what did he do, Ride the Lightning? Or
he did the first. He did Ride the Lightning, Masters, and Justice. So I mean, there's a nice resume. There, You know, he also did a lot of the Blind Guardian stuff, like the good era of Guardian, like Imaginations and Nightfall.
I think
he
might have even done a Maiden record at one of the later on Maiden records.
That could be. I don't know. I know he's Danish, and that's how Lars Ulrich got kind of hooked up with him. But yeah, so Giant Records is putting this thing out, and I mean, I remember going to the record store with my buddy Jeff Grant Carcoon, who I think might be joining us on one of the future podcasts next couple weeks here, and we were freshmen in high school, and we had seen the video for Rapture, one of the very first times that
probably one of the best death metal videos ever.
Oh god, I mean, it's primitive and it's sort of cheap in a way. Like, they didn't have a huge budget, but they had a big enough one.
Well, and they know when to not light something and when to, like, you know, key light something off the side, like leave a little bit of imagination.
Exactly. I just remember that guy trapped in like the net, and it was scary. I mean, we were scared of that video, and then I think Tony Kuhnwalder did that, who did Carcass Heartwork video. I'm almost positive it was the same guy.
Very similar look, yeah.
In terms of the aesthetic and stuff. And I just remember, you know, like, we were freaked out watching it. It was when Headbangers Ball did Into the Pit, that last half hour at night. And so we went to this record store, not the one that Mark and I have made reference to that we used to work at, but another one in town where they used to have a lot more metal records back in the day.
Yeah, like the import section, they used to call it.
Yeah, and I remember, like, we were staring at two tapes, Morbid Angel Covenant and then Cannibal Corpse, Tales of the Mutilated. And I think Jeff was the one who had the money that day, and he's sort of deciding which he's going to go with. And like, I was like, oh dude, go for Covenant, you know, like, the cover's cool, like, it had this, like,
you know,
evil
tape instead of CD on this one.
Oh yeah, we were still in the tape zone by 93, and I think unfortunately Jeff decided to go with the sick, twisted Cannibal Corpse one. And like, we got home, we're like, every song sounds the same on this, you know. Like, and it was a little disappointing, but I think I ended up going back and picking up Covenant. So maybe, as Albert I think mentioned, I came out with the good end of that deal. But just a lot of memories, because I think the presence of Morbid Angel was so huge at this point, because not only did they have a video for Rapture, but they had an even bigger video for God of Emptiness, which was all over Headbangers Ball.
Well, and actually, this was the year I saw Morbid Angel with Paradise Lost and Creator.
Okay.
And that was at the Blondie show. That you go on Paradise Lost website, and they rank it as their worst show they've ever done. There was 5-6 people.
Really?
There. And that, I mean, for that kind of album, and I think, you know, Paradise Lost were used to, like, I mean, they came in on a tour bus, and they go into this dump. They had water falling through the ceiling, and nobody there. They put on a hell of a show, but still, it was just
a shame.
Like, wow.
And the thing about Covenant that's interesting, going back to the first thing we mentioned about this band, is it's now a 3-piece. And like I said, I think the songwriting's so well balanced because of the 3 guys. Kind of, it's almost like a teeter-totter. You know, David Vincent stands in the middle on this. But you know, the video was, for God of Emptiness in particular, we'd tape it, and we'd bring like girls over, and we'd be like, you want to see like the scariest video ever? And we play it, because in the video the guy's kind of like, you know, turning into a demon with these bat wings and stuff. Yeah. It's pretty wild. And then of course his, you know, Dave Vincent's vocals at the end, the chant like "Bow to me." You know, it felt like, you know, the doorway of evil was being opened with the Necronomicon, and, you know, it was like Evil Dead 2 or something. Like, you were going to go into another dimension. But it's a deeper sounding record. The vocals are up to the next level. I mean, David Vincent's vocals are getting so disgustingly deep, and tighter, heavier songs. He's one of those guys that you can understand. You know, similar like Carl Willits, or, you know, some of those other like guttural vocals where you can actually understand what he's saying. and that adds a minor appeal to it, you know, because you can kind of almost sing along to some of this stuff, you know. But I just have a lot of memories of this. It's the first Morbid Angel I bought. Then I, of course, went back and got Blessed and Altars and things like that. And it was such a unique moment in time, because this was when my generation, you know, which we were like 3 or 4 years behind you guys, this is when we were sort of coming into our own in terms of death metal and stuff. And Morbid Angel was definitely one of the gateway bands after we kind of discovered Sepultura and Obituary. So... But we sort of settled on a trio of songs. We're going to hear Rapture, which is one of the greatest, if not, for me, the best American death metal song from start to finish, in terms of, you know, if you want it to sit somebody down and say, this is what, like, an American death metal song sounds like, I think I might pick Rapture. It's just there, you know. There's nothing terribly experimental about it, but, like, those drops into solos are so abrupt and cool, and it's a really dynamic song. And then we're going back to a re-recording of one of their first songs, Angel of Disease, which was from the Abominations disc. And you'll notice that, like, Dave Vincent's almost like trying to sing like the older style that Morbid Angel kind of had in that era of the late 80s.
I mean, this song kind of sticks out a little bit on the record as far as how it's put together. And it's just that flurry of notes in the beginning, just like, you know, dive bomb solos going everywhere in the beginning.
And there's a part at the end where it sounds like it cuts out and it kicks back in. It reminds me of Kill Again from Hell Awaits, in terms of, you know, just that sort of dynamic. And then Sworn to the Black, which has one of the coolest solos I think they've ever done. Almost sounds like he's playing, like, you know, backwards notes and just kind of, I don't know enough about guitar to understand what Trey's doing.
I don't really know if it's all like trial and error stuff. If he writes, I doubt he tabs the stuff out, but just seeing the guy play is just unbelievable.
Yeah,
like his hand's not human.
So if you haven't heard Covenant, which there's very few death metal fans out there that haven't, this should be a nice treat for you. So enjoy Sworn to the Black, Angel of Disease, and then we're starting off with Rapture. Born to the Black, Angel of Disease, and Rapture from Morbid Angel's third proper full-length Covenant here on the Requiem Metal podcast. And let us know what your favorite Morbid Angel record is. If you have in particular, we're kind of interested in which side you sort of fall into.
Yeah,
could almost do it as a contest, a vote. We'll let you know who wins. But if you have a comment about the show, or you want to cast a vote for which of the first four Morbids you really love,
or if you like the latter one's better.
Yeah, I mean, even there's some people like Ian Christie who like Formula's Fatal Flesh a little bit more, which is a really great record. It's just, I don't know. Like I said, I could put it in with these first four. It almost fits, but then after that, it kind of falls off. But maybe we'll find that lone heretic fan out there. I don't know. But email us at requiempodcast@gmail.com, or you can soon check the website, which is what?
requiempodcast.com.
Cool. So, anyways, moving on to our last David Vincent record, Domination, which was put out, I think, in 1995, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's right.
Yeah, and we did find out, we were kind of looking during the interim Talkset there when the music was playing. Giant Records was actually linked to Warner Brothers, so that's, again, a really big deal. The first thing, as Mark mentioned earlier about this record, is the cover's a little subpar. It's kind of cheesy. It's got a lot of purples and greens. It's just a weird color choice for them.
It seems like, to me, like if you went to a corporate graphic designer, like, okay, we're going to do this thing called Morbid Angel, and it's called Domination. Like, what do you think? Like, let's use this Photoshop filter and this, and it's just kind of, it's all CG with like a little bit of Photoshop. It was like, this is kind of the birth of Photoshop being used a lot, and cobbled together covers instead of being painted. So this is like kind of cutting your teeth on.
It's a transitional stage in graphic design between the the internet sort of computer age and the older kind of hand drawn stuff. Yeah. So, but they don't go with Fleming Rasmussen this time. They go with Bill Kennedy, and it has a different sound. It's definitely a lot looser. It's catchier in some ways. I mean, even
beefier too.
Yeah, like thicker riffs, doomier, thick kind of riffs. And
do you know what the producer has done before that? Or?
Bill Kennedy, I have no idea offhand. His name doesn't ring a bell in the death metal arena. And like we were saying, Covenant sold very well for as extreme of a death metal record as it was. But I maybe get a feeling that maybe Bill Kennedy was brought in to try and write some hits. Not write hits, but maybe get them focused on some catchier elements that they were starting to, emerge within the Morbid Angel canon. So maybe he's not even a metal producer. I mean, he might be just sort of a classic, Warner Brothers rock and roll guy.
Yeah, this one we see a lot of Vincent messing around with the vocals a lot.
Yes.
I mean, that was the initial thing I heard, Where the Slime Live, and I hated the underwater vocal effect thing he had on. I was like, God, I thought the whole record was like that. I was just like, all right, that's it. I'm done. I never bought it.
Yeah, and you guys, by 95, I mean, you guys were firmly into the European scene at this point, too. Yeah. I'm sure the American scene kind of was boring,
and after
too.
Covenant, this seemed like old hat.
Yeah. Whereas, like, I bought this brand new, and I was still in high school, and it seemed very...
Well, going back and listening to it, it's still a really good record.
Yeah, I think it's very underrated. I think... a lot of fans slag on this record because of the more experimental nature that happens with songs like Hate Work and Caesar's Palace and stuff. And
they brought on Eric Rutan for guitar, which he, co-wrote 2 or 3 songs on the record, too.
And again, his style of writing is really interesting. We don't have time to play Hate Work, but it's a really fascinating track. If you haven't been familiar with this record, or maybe you haven't listened to it in 10 years or something, throw it on.
Well, you can kind of see where Hate Eternal, the weirdness of like that newest Fury and Flames comes from. I mean, that's an oddball record.
Yeah,
it's really good, but I don't really know where to.
Well, and Rutan's also a producer too, correct?
Yep. He produced like Last Cannibal Corpse and a couple other, I couldn't tell you right off the top of my head, but he's kind of like the up and coming it guy, I think, in Florida.
For sure. And so he comes in on this record to kind of add maybe just a different style. And I don't know if there was pressure within the band or pressure from the label to try and change their style or to bring in a new member, or if maybe they just got exhausted touring with only a 3-piece. I think he toured
with them on Covenant.
Did he?
I think that's what it was. He got into it.
Okay.
Don't quote me on it.
Yeah, who knows? But I really think this could have been a breakout death metal record for the American scene in a way, much like I think Symbolic from Death, which came out in the exact same year. But I think American death metal was almost completely ignored in 1995.
I didn't pick up Symbolic when it came out either. I was so done with American death metal at that point, and that was just me being young and inexperienced and not knowing, just not listening to stuff. It was just out of ignorance that I ignored the stuff.
Well, and you think about 1995, that's the year Slaughter of the Soul came out.
That's when Rongan Records was like going huge.
That's the Dark Tranquility birth, the In Flames birth, the,
black metal.
Yeah, I mean, Emperor was, riding the waves of In the Night Side Eclipse, and that was sort of a commercial, blow up for black metal. So it was not the time to be listening to like, Morbid Angel records or Obituary records or Death records, and that's really too bad. But
this was like World Demise time, wasn't it? Yeah, which is
again
a clunker.
And you guys probably thought of all that stuff in the same light, know. And so it's I don't know. Like I think I didn't have the foresight to know any better because I was a junior in high school, and so we just bought it and listened to the crap out of it. You know?
It's not that we just didn't care. It was just
Well, you were beyond it.
Young, yeah.
It's like now I don't pay any attention to some bands anymore because it's just, like they could put out a masterpiece and I wouldn't know because it's just, I'm kind of done with them because I'm into different stuff now.
Yeah.
But
you gotta, focus on, certain, you can't just completely be eternally 17 and experimenting every single possible thing.
Sure. And I think the interesting thing about this too, and I think it was Albert that pointed it out, in a Morbid Angel interview I was reading in Decibel, where he was talking about this really coincided with the death of Headbangers Ball, and that whereas like Covenant blew up because the videos for Rapture and God of Emptiness were in a really heavy rotation. You take a song like Dominate or Where the Slime Live or even Eyes to Hear or Eyes to See, Ears to Hear. Those are catchy, like almost like hit song for extreme metal worthy.
Yeah.
And if they had like bigger exposure on radio or on say Headbangers Ball on MTV, who's to say that this album couldn't be seen in a different light at this time?
Oh, I think so.
But yeah, c'est la vie. History has its way of sort of playing out. So maybe this album is a little bit more revered now, I think, by the fans. I hope, certainly you've come around the last couple of years to really appreciating this for what it is. But, this, Trey is starting to throw, with Dreaming and Melting, he's starting to do a lot more of these, like, almost like mystical...
Well, it's back to the interludes like on Blessed of the Sick.
Yeah, but they're different than Blessed of the Sick. They're not, like, classical or as medieval. They're almost, like, more cosmic sounding.
Yeah. There's more like a progressive flair to them than...
And I think he was starting to get into, like, kind of the sort of Tony Robbins kind of new age, like, think for yourself, kind of like...
Blaze your own path.
Yeah, blaze your own path, and he was just really getting into some different stuff. I remember, like, on the next record, he was talking about gas giants and clouds in the universe, and Hymn to the Gas Giant, I think, is the tune. And it's just he's getting a little bit weirder, and that's fine. But you could tell on this record that there's just a lot of new experimental elements. They're slowing the songs down, like you said, thicker, doomier riffs. But like the song, we're going to open things up with Dominate here, is just, it's like Rapture. It's to the point.
It's a great opening track.
And it really just, announces that they're still, even though they're on a major label, they're still like the band. So, anyways, any final thoughts on Morbid Angel here as we end the evening?
Well, let's hope that their next record is as fruitful as the first four.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential with David Vincent coming in, and our fingers are crossed here. And I think hopefully you as a Morbid Angel fan are thinking the same sort of thing. So,
well, this has been, the last couple of years has been great for reunions and not necessarily the reunion and comeback, but bands that have kind of come back into their own, like Paradise Lost and. I totally blank on anybody else right now, but there's been a lot of bands that kind of like, even that last like Creator record, for instance, like people like finally they've
Testament,
they've
refound their footing,
exactly. And it's kind of rare to see somebody going on for 10 years of kind of noodling around, not really being focused, and then come back and put a killer record out. So I'm hoping they have what it takes. So,
not to put any pressure on you, Morbid Angel, but there's pressure for sure. So we're gonna end with a foursome of songs. We're, like I said, open up with Dominate, kind of the title track, and then Where the Slime Live, which is a song you didn't like at first, but now
I think it's fantastic.
Kind of love. And Eyes to Hear, Jesus. Eyes to see, ears to hear. Say that 5 times fast. Sorry, it's like...
Well, that's one that Rutan and Trey co-wrote together.
Yeah.
You can kind of tell.
And the cool thing about those 3 songs is you're going to hear 3 completely different vocal styles from David Vincent, just showing his versatility, which I hope he kind of brings back when they do this new record. And then we're going to close things down with probably one of the the most sort of like just pure Morbid Angel songs on the record, which is Dawn of the Angry.
Yeah.
But again, if you have any responses, please send us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com, or surf around the website there, requiempodcast.com. Yeah.
Leave comments. Soon we're going to have all the old issues of the Requiem magazine up on PDF form, and we're going to have blogs and all kinds of other fancy stuff to throw at you guys. So
should be neat. And then the coasters and t-shirts are coming soon. So, but for Jason Hundy
and Mark Rudolph,
enjoy some Morbid Angel.
With iron through our veins, and we'll make so elite, hunting for never for you.